Hi, how you doing? This is Wendy Sweet, and I am here to begin our great alternative investor podcast. I don't have my brother here. I'm doing this secretly because I'm kind of telling on him. We recorded a podcast that was awesome with a good friend of ours from Australia. She's actually an accountant. Her name is Salena Kulkarni, and she has an awesome story. She has a mastermind that she's actually doing in Australia. She is also someone that we met through Freedom Founders. You've heard us talk about that a lot. And when we actually recorded the podcast with her, Bill was at the helm trying to figure out what buttons to push, and we actually had about 3 minutes that weren't recorded once he realized that the record button wasn't pushed. so so I'm here really to just introduce her. You're going to come into really the beginning of her story, but she's got a great one. She's got a great business going on in Australia, and is also interested in investing in the US, as you'll hear. Thanks so much.
Educating himself around wealth creation through property. And I, being an accountant, was very conservative, didn't like the idea of debt. So I was a very reluctant property investor. But eventually what happened was he would put papers in front of me and I would sign them blindly. And eventually I decided, look, hang on a sec, I better actually have a look at what he's doing. And in the meantime, I had bought, set up, sold a number of different businesses, mainly because I really enjoyed the entrepreneurial side of business. And I started to look at the property stuff, and I recognized fairly quickly that the sort of returns that we were getting in the property side, in contrast to the amount of time, blood, sweat, and tears that goes into a normal business, there was just a huge discrepancy. So what I actually did at that point was I started to educate myself around property. I sought out some amazing mentors, spent, somewhere in the vicinity of $500,000 on education, and pretty much said to my husband, look, step aside, I'll take it from here. And yeah. And luckily for me, he was very happy to kind of let me take the reins and just run with it. So that's kind of how I've become a property investor.
That's awesome.
Nice. Again, we're here with Salena Kulkarni of Phoenix Wealth Group. You can, by the way, she's got a great website, phoenixwealthgroup.com.au. Make sure if you put the .au at the end, otherwise you won't get it.
That's right. It's a foreign website.
That's too funny. So why property for you? What interested you the most in real estate?
Look, I think accounting and accountancy has always been a bad fit for me, in that I actually wanted to be a vet. And I did accounting because at the time there was no veterinary science course offered at university here in Canberra. And I wasn't really interested in the cost associated with, moving to another city to study. And, as soon as I got into accounting, it was easy, but it really, for me, lacked a lot of creativity. And as I mentioned, I've always had a real passion for business. And what I liked about working in places like Deloitte was that exposure to lots of different businesses. But what I recognized very quickly was that, business is hard. It's hard work. And, from a time leverage point of view, it's almost counterintuitive. A lot of people go into business because they want to be their own boss and they want freedom and flexibility. And a lot of businesses that I was involved in, whether it was as a consultant or a CFO or whatever, it was hard. It was hard work. So when I started to look at property, what I realized very quickly was that property investing gave me time leverage, gave me financial leverage. And funnily enough, I don't think a lot of people appreciate this, but there's a high degree of creativity and control. So those four factors combined, I think, were really probably what opened that world for me more than, if I'd had a job where I'd been very passionate about it. So that for me is why property is so exciting.
Well, creative is not something that a CPA needs to be doing.
Yeah.
That'll get you in trouble.
Creative accounting is frowned upon.
Yes.
And
that is true.
You're so correct with the different levels of being creative in real estate investing. There's so many different ways that you can, as they would say here, skin that cat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can do seller financing if you're a buy and hold type of an investor where you're buying the property, and instead of being the property manager, you could always do seller financing. Why would you do something like that, for example? If you're doing seller financing, it gives you an additional out. It makes it a little more liquid. You don't have to sell the property if you need more money. You could sell the note. You could sell a piece of the note. At the same time, you don't have any responsibility for the properties any longer, but you still control the asset by having a note instead of owning the property. Now, in the States, you give up, and I'm not sure how the taxes are in Australia, but in the States, you give up tax benefits when you're not owning the property. It's straight income from there. But you've got your short-term rentals, you got your long-term rentals, you've got mortgage financing. I don't know any other asset class that when the market is strong, you can sell that property at a profit from the appreciation point of view. And when the market is flat or declining, it can pay you a dividend in the form of rents. So it's a hedge against itself. So good for you.
I have a quick little question that I'd like to pump out there for you. So
Please.
I'm interested, and I remember the first time I met you, and you're, wanting to learn about investing over here. You're wanting to make contacts and that kind of thing. What do you see the big differences between investing in the U.S. and investing in Australia? And what do you see that is similar?
Yeah, fantastic question, Wendy. Look, part of my attraction to the US market is that it offers a different kind of leverage that we can't get here in Australia. So, especially as a foreigner, when we look at bringing our money to the US market, it's a predominantly cash strategy. It's not as easy for an Australian to leverage in your market using conventional lending. So the major difference that I see in your market compared to ours is, I talked just a moment ago about creativity. Mm-hmm. So there's certainly ways to be creative in the Australian market, but we're very highly regulated here. We're highly regulated, and so that restricts the capacity to transact. Entry and exit when it comes to transfer of property is incredibly expensive here. We have massive stamp duties. So people don't trade in properties probably as, it's not as common as it is over there, because trading properties in and out of properties there, the cost of entry and exit is very low. The second thing is the median house price in Australia, I believe, is somewhere around $700,000 right now.
Wow.
And so for a really basic, below average type of property, you're really still looking at sort of $300,000-400,000 just to get your foot in the door. And so the only way to do that clearly is through leverage, through bank lending. So that's another big difference. The average price point is very different. The third big thing is that, I feel that in Australia, the metrics are such that the kind of cash flow that you can generate off those assets is significantly lower than the comparable asset in the States. So there are some regional towns where you can go and buy a piece of property and you can get a little bit of cash flow out of it, but not much.
Hmm.
In Australia, typically, if we can get a gross income stream of 4 to 5%, that's considered very strong.
Wow.
So when you look at, let's say you held a $1 million property outright, and let's say you got a very healthy 5% income stream from it. By the time you take out your rates and taxes and property management, forgetting that imagine you have no loan on it, it's just the expenses. That 5% quickly becomes, somewhere between, 1 to 3%.
Wow.
So when you think about the fact that you might have tied up $1 million, that's a pretty poor return in terms of cash flow. So what I'm trying to do with my business is I'm trying to teach people that you can use the Australian market to pump up the tires and build a capital base. But like from a cash flow point of view, you have to be thinking outside the square. And so for me, the US market, which I've been involved in for, over a decade now, that offers that really great opportunity for cash flow. So I'm not sure if I've answered that all that well. I think what I like about the US markets in terms of similarities is I think there's good people in your market, the same as there's good people here. Property is still property, but to be perfectly frank, I almost have to explain to people that when you're talking about US real estate, it's a very different beast to what we have here in Australia. So I'm not sure about it's still housing.
Sure.
People still have to live. I guess the economics are the same. So people still have to live somewhere. When you guys had your crash in, 07, 08, what my experience was at that time was that rents didn't really fall a huge amount.
No.
So the price of property got smashed, but the rents still kind of held their ground because people still have to live somewhere.
Right.
So I think the economics are what tie the markets together.
Yeah, we love that about housing, is that the house doesn't know how much it's worth.
Yeah.
And as long as it's cash flowing, it doesn't matter what it's worth, as long as it's cash flowing. So
And I've got another question that may be kind of dumb. Do you have like self-directed IRAs, those types of things, 401ks? Do you have that in Australia as well?
Yeah, we do. We call it superannuation. So our retirement funds are called superannuation. So if you put your money with a big fund, like a national fund, that's just a managed superannuation fund. But a lot of people are now opting into what we call self-managed super funds, which is where you have the capacity to control what happens with that money. From what I understand about the way that the US retirement funds work versus Australia, again, you guys have significantly more flexibility and opportunity in how those funds are deployed in contrast to Australia. Honestly, when I look at your market there, I think it would be very easy for people to create significant wealth rapidly in contrast to our market.
Wow.
And what's really a shame is only about 5% of the public even knows that you can self-direct your IRAs here.
Wow.
And that, it really is a shame that they're not educated on the possibilities. At the same time, most of the general population, and it's probably the same way in both countries, is that they don't have the time to manage it, and they don't have the education to manage it, and they're afraid to do it themselves because, frankly, in the U.S., basic finance is not taught in schools. Just your basic finance, and that really is a shame. I hate that part.
Yeah, we're in the same boat.
Now, we were talking about what you're doing for others. So as part of your business, you're holding hands, you're teaching people property strategies. Give us a little background on what you're doing to help others.
Look, again, funnily enough, the business that I initially started probably 10 years ago now came about because people just started asking me, look, how are you doing this? How can you help me? And at that time, I had become very interested in the opportunities presented by the US market. And I was taking a very structured approach and a very, very slow approach to how I invested in that market. And at the time, as with any great opportunity, there were a lot of less than ethical operators that sprang up and that kind of honed in on Australia. We're a very wealth aware nation per capita. There would be, we have so many property investing magazines, literature, media reports. So property investing as a concept is very well accepted here. And I think a lot of people kind of take advantage of that from other countries. What happened was someone saw that I was taking a very structured approach at a time where a lot of people were getting burnt by some of the US providers, and asked me, could you create some education to help people? So I started flying around Australia teaching people, if you're going to invest in the US market, here's how to do it safely. And kind of just building some frameworks around how they could tackle, how do they, do their due diligence on providers? How do they handle the tax and accounting? What are they looking for in property? What's the sweet spot in the markets? What do different markets look like? And really kind of giving people, a base level of understanding so that when they went over there, they could do it themselves. But what came out of that was people started to say, look, I love the education, but I still feel nervous. Can you help? And so that was when I thought, well, I better do this properly. And I set up my first business. And then when the Australian dollar crashed, which probably would have been about 3 or 4 years ago now, we were, at one point neck and neck, 1 for 1. And in fact, at one point, I think our dollar was $1.06 to your dollar. So it was a great investment opportunity. Sure. What's happened since is we've returned to the long time average, which is around 70 cents. So all those people who bought back then have made, quite a substantial amount of capital growth purely from that exchange difference.
Nice.
But when the dollar dropped, I started to get less interested in the US market, and I kind of brought my focus back to Australia. And a lot of those people followed me back and said, well, what are you doing here now? And so for the last few years, I've certified as a property investment advisor. And what I've become really passionate about, because I've made it kind of a mission of mine to expose myself to as many different styles of investing as possible. So I haven't necessarily taken the straight line path to where I am, because I'm more interested in the play of property and real estate rather than trying to get the most amplified results straight away. So what I've become passionate about with Phoenix is that I want to teach people about the value of having a plan and working out the strategy that's the right fit for them before they pull the trigger. I think that in Australia, because there's a lot of awareness around property, and again, there's a lot of people who take advantage of that, there are a lot of property people who advocate this idea that one strategy fits everyone, mainly because they're incentivized to flog one kind of property.
Sure.
Whereas I'm an advocate of not every shoe fits every person. It's really important to take into consideration, what is your risk profile? What are your means? What are your financial habits? What are the major milestones that are coming up in your life? Where do you want to get to? And then reverse engineering how you get there. And so that's kind of what Phoenix is about. It's about helping people get the most amplified results with the smallest amount of resources in the shortest possible time.
Awesome.
So you're a financial advisor instead of a stockbroker.
I say property investment advisor, not a financial advisor.
I get that, but a financial advisor can encompass all of that. The problem is most financial advisors still don't understand the property side of things. They're all still trained in the market, but they still should be asking those same questions about the risk tolerance, what it is you're looking for, where are you now in your life, what are your goals, all that. And most people, you're right, they try to put the same shoe on every single foot, and it doesn't work that way. So one of the things that Wendy and I are very passionate about, we are constantly talking about it in our podcast, is mentorship, masterminds, and networking. So I know you had some really good mentors that helped you out. You want to talk about some of those, and how you met them?
Yeah,
And
look, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I've definitely invested substantial amounts of money in education as well. So I've definitely gone down the path of conventional education. But what I have felt about some of the educators that I've been, part of their program is that they're good educators, but not necessarily getting the results in their own lives. So where I've actually found greater value is finding people who are actually having success in the space that I want to have success. They're not necessarily famous. They're not high profile. They're often quietly successful. But sometimes these people can share wisdom where it's the difference that makes all the difference.
Sure.
So, I don't particularly think I'm the smartest or most well-networked person in the world. But what I think what I bring to the table is that capacity to take the best of what's happening in a lot of different areas and distill that so that, I think what we all want ultimately is to save time and money.
Right.
Not waste time, not waste money. So
Sure.
that's kind of that's the value I think people are looking for. So that's where I've really focused. And I can't stress enough, if you're not investing in your education and growing your mind and your network, you're going to do it the hard way. I mean, there's a fast way and a slow way. And if you're not investing in mentors and you're not investing in your own education, it's going to take you it's not to say you can't do it on your own, but it will take you significantly more time, and potentially you will have to, deploy significantly more resources to get the same outcome.
Right. I like to say that I've never had an original idea in my life. I just know a lot of smart people, and I just copy them.
Yeah, love it.
And that's how you
great.
do it. And in a mastermind setting as well. If you're the smartest person in the room, you need to find another room, because
Absolutely.
all you're doing is giving and you're not getting.
Right.
And that's the whole point of masterminds, is you give and you receive. And
Absolutely.
we use masterminds as well as an insurance policy. I don't know if we've discussed this before, but that's how we adjust for risk, because most of the people that we're involved with are in different parts of the country. We get to see what's going on in their markets and adjust for them before it comes to ours. So networking and mastermind, extremely important. I want to mention your website again, phoenixwealthgroup.com.au. You have to put the AU at the end if you want to go there. It's a great website. She's got some really good training on there. I love what you're doing with teaching others and bringing them up. I do have just one more question and a quick comment. What kind of interest rates are the banks charging in Australia right now for a conventional mortgage loan?
They're probably not too dissimilar to what you guys are experiencing in the States. I mean, there were some rates put out, within the last 12 months that had a 3 in front of them.
Wow.
3.99, 3.9, but you really had to be, pretty much a straightforward mum and dad type person to get those loans. If you're a property investor and you're looking at, finance for properties, the rates are typically 4.6 upwards.
Right.
If you're looking at commercial lending, you're definitely looking into the 5s, 6s, and 7s. But yeah, I think there used to be a massive discrepancy between the rates we had here and the rates you had there. I know after the crash, you guys had some crazy low rates.
Right. Well,
We
they're
didn't
still in,
quite
they're
get
in the
that low.
fours, probably creeping up on 5s.
Yeah, that's same place as us then. Same place as us.
So the reason I'm asking these questions, I know your price points are pretty high there for the properties, and I'm just trying to think of ways where if it costs a lot to trade properties, perhaps you could trade notes where you wouldn't have those same types of fees, but it would be difficult for an investor to make any money at those rates to do
just to help you understand, we don't have notes here in Australia. There's no such
So
concept in
how
terms
does
of
one finance a property there?
there's banks, and then sharks.
So you don't really have a big private lending community there?
It does exist, but typically the people I know who operate in that space will only lend to builders and commercial fit outs rather than individuals. If you are, I mean, I'm sure there are a very small number of people who would consider lending to individuals, but it's more you'd really have to search far and wide. And I'm guessing, again, the rates would be, killer. And, even in the States, like you talk about the sort of returns that you make on short-term lending, they're fantastic, but the margin is there to carry that. Whereas here, I mean, the margins just aren't there. The metrics are all a bit, squeezed here.
Well, that said, I wanted to mention perhaps that a fund is something that you might want to think about putting together for your students, where you could pool their money, and then invest into assets over here in the States versus teaching individuals. It's still good for them to understand that, but pooling those funds and investing in different funds and different operators in the States. And that way they have somebody behind them that they trust that is also doing the due diligence for them as well. So that's something to think about.
Absolutely.
It's still a great market here, and it will be for a while. We were just discussing
Flying to Australia.
Yes.
I would love you to come to Australia.
We'd love to go.
But besides that, there are markets here where you can still buy houses for $8,000, $9,000, $12,000, $20,000, and they're not crappy houses. They're just communities that are
crappy communities.
I don't want to say it. They have not recovered.
They're low income.
Yeah, they have not recovered from the crash, but they're still strong rental markets.
Yes.
And that's a great market where you can pick up a house for $20,000.
Yep.
You can turn around and sell that home for $45,000 and then owner finance it, and still get a really low rate to your customer. I mean, relatively low. The borrower would be paying somewhere in the 7 to 8% rate, but you're able to make it up on the sale of the home at a higher price. And now you have passive income that's coming in, and there's lots of communities that can use this.
Or you could rent it for $700 or $800 a month, which is kind of crazy when you paid that much for it. And I mean, Jackson, Mississippi is a perfect example of a market that's like that. It's
when
amazing.
you were in Dallas, you didn't get to meet Walter Walford, our friend from Jackson, Mississippi. He's been there for 35 years. He said that he has bought and sold the same house 5 or 6 times.
Wow.
He's been through all of them.
But
that's amazing.
His goal in life now is to have as many homeowners in Jackson, Mississippi as possible. Their market has deteriorated to the point where it was almost all rentals in there. The rents were still at the national level, but the home prices were really low. So he's made it his goal in life to take all these tenants and turn them into homeowners. And he's doing some really good works, and he's making he already has a good living now. His other strategy is he's buying these homes with his kids. Actually, his grandkids inherited Roth IRAs, and he's building wealth for his family down the line now because he doesn't need it anymore.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But there's so many different strategies. And by the way, thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to see you in person again.
Pleasure.
And one more time, the website is phoenixwealthgroup.com.au. Right? Any last words of wisdom?
Look, for me, on the topic of masterminds, what I think is so terrific about what you guys have done is you've managed to find masterminds where the caliber of people in the room is incredibly high. Those sorts of masterminds are very hard to come by in this country. It's very much perceived as a competitive space.
Wow.
So there's not a lot of cooperation amongst people. And, what I love about the masterminds that you guys are part of is that people are screened before they come in the door.
Mm-hmm.
So people who are in the room with you and that you're networking with are good people with the right ethical and moral, viewpoint, as well as offering top-notch service. So, I think people who work with, you guys and people like you are in great hands.
Well, thank you. We try to get involved with people that have a mindset of
Giving.
Well, but there's a mindset of abundance versus, drawing in and
scarcity
and dealing with scarcity. And that's this is a team sport, and there's plenty of opportunity for everyone. And where are you going to create the opportunity? But within the group,
right?
Yeah,
we're all like-minded. We're all looking at the same thing. We all do business with each other, and that's how we are going to survive this versus the big banks and Wall Street, right?
So, Salena,
Absolutely.
if someone wants to reach out to you, is your email address on your website?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
yes,
great.
It is. Otherwise, they can also find me on Facebook and LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest, most modern day way of getting in touch these days.
That's terrific. That's terrific.
Yes, we have to move into the 20th century.
Yes.
I know you had trouble with us on Facebook.
Yeah,
We hardly ever
I
look
did
at
try and get you. Yeah.
We have people now.
That's right.
My people will talk to your people.
That's right.
Anyway, thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks.
Pleasure. Thanks, guys.